My name is Jorge Ferrer. I'm the chair of the Department of East-West Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And in addition to chairing the department, I teach classes on transpersonal studies, transpersonal psychology, a branch of psychology including the spiritual dimension of the human being. I also teach classes on comparative mysticism and also on embodied spiritual inquiry, or how to bring the fullness of who we are to inquire together in spiritual matters. And then finally, classes about transpersonal perspectives on sexuality and relationships. But definitively, this vision of this image of Sorba, the Buddha, speaks about the integration of the lamp vital, the life force, immanent life, spiritual life, and the spiritual consciousness, the equanimity, the compassion, fully integrated with our balls. In the case of men, of course. Yeah. We're not filming this, right?
Yes, we are.
Oh, but
yes,
this is not.
We are. This is how we tricked you. This is how we tricked you.
That's great.
We're talking about different forms of relationships. Loving one person,
yes.
Loving two or three people at the same time, and not identifying with any of that. To some viewers, this may sound very abstract, our
yes.
conversation. Let's make it really tangible and concrete. Well, what are we talking about, and what do you recommend?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, the paradigm of open relationship I would gravitate would be one that I think is the most prevalent, that you have one primary relationship that is like your primary partner, and that's the person that you love, all full chakras, get awakening with this person, sexually and emotionally, in a soul level, you're in love with the soul of this person, right? So that's that, But in my experience, that relationship would be an access, an access in my life from which I could also have different contacts with different people, other women, in particular, because I'm mostly heterosexual, and in which I would have different combination of chakras opening, For example, with one could be just an exploration that would be most purely sexual, of course always in a container of care and respect, With other people would be more emotional, and would be more physical connection and cuddling and really connecting from the heart, With others could be a mix of both, So I think there is a full spectrum of the ways that we can connect with other people, Once you break or you overcome the monocentric or monogamous paradigm that tells you that intimate contact can only happen with one single partner, That's very limiting, when you consider that full spectrum of possibilities of connecting with a variety of individuals, So that I hope that helps a little in terms of giving a bit more flesh to what I was referring to.
Yes. So somebody's struggling with whether they should open their relationship or not. What would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is that they need to keep on struggling. Especially important is that to realize that we have all been kind of conditioned by monocentrism, So we have not only been the victims of socially enforced monogamy, but this has been internalizing what I call psychologically enforced monogamy, So we have these strong forces within us, conditionings that tell us that that's really the right way to have relationships, right? Also, we're bombarded with movies and songs, all of them kind of perpetuating that kind of paradigm, If you add to that, that very few of us have had an optimal childhood, and we come to relationships with fears of abandonment, and jealousy. Those two come together very strongly towards feeling, no, monogamy is what I want to do. So the first thing is to really realize is this a free choice? This is the inquiry. Is this a free choice, or is this something that has been kind of really conditioned culturally, psychologically, at so many levels within my being? And that's a very hard inquiry to face and to develop in a very honest way, because it's very easy to fall into some kind of relational spiritual bypassing, in which I'm choosing monogamy because it's the spiritually more correct option, it's the sacred relationship, but this choice very often is kind of hiding serious difficulties, to open a relationship.
So what you're saying is to a couple who's struggling with that question is to remain in the struggle and to actually to actually look at it as a good thing. It's a good thing. This struggle, this tension is a good thing. One person wants to open the relationship.
Correct. And they need to be very clear that they do want to open the relationship. They need to see the value in it. They need to want to transform jealousy into sympathetic joy or compassion. They need to see the value in that avenue. Otherwise, why to go there?
Some years ago, I met a woman, American woman, very sensual, very, very attractive woman who was married to a Brazilian man.
Yeah.
And she told me a story that I've always remembered and shared many times, because I think it is very very important message here. So she married her lover, the Brazilian man, and the day after the wedding, he stopped wanting her sexually. They had no more sex.
Sure.
And when I met her, it was about a year after they got married, and she says, I got enough of the situation, had no sex the whole year.
Yes.
So I said to my husband, I love you and I will never leave you, but I'm going to see other men.
Sure.
And the husband, Brazilian, was freaking out.
Yeah.
Totally freaking out.
Sure.
Ended up having to surrender to his very strong-willed wife doing this. And he also had to go out and find other women.
Yes.
And ultimately, they got back together.
Yeah. Yes, that's a possibility, and that's great, but that's risky. It's risky because more often than not, when people take those directions without a container of psycho-spiritual growth and togetherness and walking together in that direction, more often than not, they're going to move apart, you know. But for me, like if a couple, they would really want to walk in that direction, you know, there is certain kind of practices that can be done, you know. Ideally, psychotherapeutic container with like kind of like a container, you know. It's always risky to do them on your own, but yes.
What I think is crucial to identify is that sometimes in a marriage or in a commitment, in a monogamous commitment, people shut down sexually. Yes. Both men and women.
Correct.
Can totally shut down if they have to be the good wife or the good husband.
Correct.
And sometimes the key is to say, well, take your freedom and help yourself. And
yes, very often many couples, their sexuality has been rekindled and reconnected after they have some kind of like selective opening.
That's kind of the message, I think, of the story.
That's part of it, and I think kind of like that kind of conscious selective opening can actually help towards the longevity of relationships. You know, we live in a paradigm of serial monogamy. People are changing partners every year, 3 years. 3 and 7 years each,
yes,
you know.
Yes.
It's like this is the new paradigm. It's not long-term monogamy, it's serial monogamy, right? But and I've always felt very dissatisfied with that paradigm. It's like very mercantilistic, and I think there is something about staying with one person for a long time in terms of spiritual depth and emotional depth, you know. So my inquiry has always been fostered, paradoxically, what can help couples to stay together for longer time, you know. And definitively, I think what you're pointing to about like some selective opening at certain moments, you know, it can rekindle the passion in a couple, you know. So you were asking before what people can do if they really want to go in that direction, right? So instead of like exploring each one on their own, you know, like one possibility that we, in the context of the holistic sexuality world, we have worked with some couples in that context, is that, you know, this practice that you can gradually desensitize yourself, you know, and explore jealousy in a safe container. And this practice can start very simple with like seeing your partner giving a massage to a third person, someone for opposite sex, you know, with their clothes on, you know, and you're witnessing your partner touching someone else, and you have like a note and you write down what's been awakening yourself, you know, is jealousy, what's going on, you know, and you inquire that later with your partner, with therapists and so forth, you know. But of course, this is like a first step, you know. You can move into do a massage with less clothing, you know. You can move into other explorations, for example, having a partner at some point do a more, you know, instinctive exploration of the body of another person, you know, using the sense of smell, for example, using the sense of taste, for example, you know, what is being awakened there, you know, and you can start moving gradually into more even like sexual positions without having sex, you know, sexual positions. What happens when I see my partner actually in a sexual position with someone else? What's been awakened? But this needs to be, of course, a very gradual process desensitization, and ideally a process that should be contained by skilled therapists or people who can, otherwise could be very tricky and could backfire in a couple. It's very delicate when you move in those directions, as you can imagine.
I read your article about spirituality and relationships, polyamory and monogamy and beyond.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And the way I understand your article is that you're wanting to move to a place where we don't label ourselves as one or the other, but we can choose in any situation whatever is the most loving thing to do. The most loving form of the relationship, is that right?
Yes, I think that's correct. And I call that space that is catalyzed by a movement beyond monogamy and polyamory. I've called it relational freedom. So both those categories, they can become very liberating for people at different points of their lives, but also they can become boxes, they can become ideologies, I identify myself with being monogamous, I identify myself with being polyamorous, and once you identify with one or the other, you start looking down those people who are not like you. It's a kind of a relation.
It creates separation. Labeling and identifying with one particular.
Correct. It's a kind of also, we humans have a tendency towards narcissism, right? It's in religious matters, I'm a Christian, and therefore there is always a Christian or Buddhist or New Age, whatever you may want to call it, but there is always the tendency, once I identify myself with being a Buddhist or a Christian or whatever spiritual choice I have, to believe that my choice is not only really the best for me, but it's kind of somehow universally superior to others. So I think in the relational realm we see the same, and you can see the same in so many books written by pro-monogamy authors and also to pro-polyamory authors, in which they kind of in a explicit or more subtle ways, they kind of put down the other camp, For example, monogamous people, normally talk and think about polyamorous people as people who cannot commit, they're emotionally immature, they're hedonistic, they're narcissistic, they are fearful, they are just not have their shit together.
Bad press. You call it, in your article, you call it has a bad press.
Exactly, yeah. So, and then, but from the other perspective happens the same, polyamorous people also tend to look down at monogamous people, There are people who are kind of hypocritical because they are thinking actually about, they have desires for others, but they don't want to admit or they don't want to act upon them, or also they feel that there's people who are not in contact with essential dimensions of love, that is non-possessive and expansive, So there is this kind of what I call the monopoly wars that are starting to emerge in our culture, And I think we're going to be seeing much more of that kind of monopoly wars that are fostered by what I call monopride and polypride. The deep-seated belief that my relational style, either monogamous or polyamorous, is the best psychologically or developmentally, morally or ethically, or more spiritually correct, and so forth.
And where do you think we should be going?
That's my inquiry. That has been my inquiry all my life. When I first was born in Barcelona in Spain, and when I first entered the realm of relationships, I realized that I didn't fit in the monocentric or monogamist paradigm that surrounded me. I remember.
How did you find out? Can you tell?
Yes, absolutely. I was walking in the streets of Barcelona with my first girlfriend, my first steady girlfriend, and then suddenly the shocking realization that to be with this beautiful woman in a really stable and serious relationship meant that I couldn't express my embodied love to anyone else in the entire planet. Of all the other millions and millions of people, it struck me as something completely crazy. And I was starting to struggle with that through many, many years. And
your girlfriend, of course, was Catholic and wasn't open to this conversation.
She wasn't very Catholic, but definitely she was very monogamous, and it was as well as most of the people around me, So that's something that I think that many poly people have felt. They have felt, in the same way that gay men and women felt, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and they still feel in many places in the world and in the States, I think many naturally poly people, they feel the effect of what we can call polyphobia, and polyphobia can be both
What is polyphobia?
Well, polyphobia would be like kind of like the subtle judgment towards polyamory as being kind of, there could be like a fear towards it, a kind of like a moral condemnation, even some kind of disgust, or some kind of like a spiritual condensation towards it, So polyphobia can be both externalized, so I externalize this towards poly people, but also it can be internalized. So many polyamorous people we have, and that happened to me growing up in Barcelona in those times, I kind of internalized polyphobia. I was feeling basically essentially, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me that I don't fit in what everybody's talking that love should be about, right? Is there anything wrong with me? And I should go to the psychotherapist, I should like fix myself. What's really going on, And so it can be accompanied by self-doubt and self-criticism, and ultimately even by cynicism and depression, and lead to serious consequences, I think that there are many, many men and women, that they suffer from internalized polyphobia, in our culture.
That they're very hard on themselves. They judge themselves when they find themselves loving more than one person or being attracted. Yes.
And when they find themselves like in love with their partners and at the same time desiring sexually other people, and they have like this kind of like conflict inside, and they feel, well, there must be something wrong with me. But when I was growing in Barcelona and even later here in California, like some of my friends would ask me, Jorge, but why do you want to love sexually more than one person? And for me, like the question, that wasn't the right question. The question for me was, why not? Why wouldn't you want to love more people in this life in fuller ways, What's prevent human beings, what is blocking us from loving more, in ways that are not just, in fuller ways, and what I mean by that is the ways that integrate, eros, and also emotional love and spiritual love, This comes from you probably know from the Greek distinction between eros, philia, and agape. That also the Christian tradition kind of like dissociated, God was supposed to be all agape, and eros was something that animals and human beings who are sinful we used to do, But of course, that's a very dissociated view of love. Love is multidimensional and is vibrating at all these frequencies. And it's a dissociated view of the divine, right? The divine is both. It's agape, it's philia, but it's eros too, right? And this is what I think many people in your program I live are telling, right? That the erotic is a force that is also spiritual and is divine.
Yes. There is a theory that there's the forces of sex, love, and eros, where sex is more the animalistic drive.
Correct.
Love is the heart and is not necessarily sexual, and eros is the erotic, somewhat mixed with love.
Exactly.
And sex is the purely animalistic.
Exactly.
And those three forces work through
exactly.
us.
And unfortunately, there was a kind of like a descriptive truth around that in many cases, because sexuality has not been as conscious as it could be, because it has not been integrated with the love of the heart and the spiritual consciousness and the light, In many men and in many women, to go there at certain times, and even today, they would become more animalistic, And there is something about like being able to mindfully explore the more animalistic dimensions of sexuality that could be valuable, But ideally also like you want to, with a partner, you want to move in a full chakra open communion with them, with eros and your heart open and the light of your consciousness on, So there was a descriptive truth there, in this kind of view, but it's not an absolute view, that we can integrate, eros and with the heart, and then eros becomes also, it's just not animalistic, there's a dimension of tenderness in the instinct that can emerge, right? And when it's integrated with consciousness, the erotic impulse achieves kind of like an intelligence, like an evolutionary unfolding, For example, when in my own work, personal work, when those centers, energies became more integrated, I found myself that my sexual energy would awaken in the right measure with the right people in the right circumstances. Something that didn't happen before. Would be someone very sexually attractive and I would be like very aroused. But when all those centers were integrated, it wasn't like any kind of control top-down.
Right.
It was just natural, organic unfolding of the sexual energy because of the integration of the centers.
Nice, yeah. So what I sense about you is like you have a really big heart. You're full of love, and you also are very driven to understand spiritual understanding.
Yes.
Philosophy, psychology.
Yes.
Very strong.
Yes. Yeah. In my work at CIS and in my written work, like most of my written work has been actually about the spirituality and also bringing spirituality into education and in many facets of life. So these relationships and sexuality, it's like a personal inquiry that I've always had in my life. I've done some writing about it. I used to teach some classes at CIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, you know, and I think I'm going to be doing more of that in the future because I'm writing a book on this, you know. So
yes, I know you're writing a book on love. Yes.
Yeah, the title is still at least 2 or 3 years until it comes. So we'll do another show, hopefully, when it's coming. It's going to be called. I think the title is the right to love. The right to love. The right to love, and the subtitle could be something like spirituality, sexuality, and evolutions of intimate relationships, or perhaps like something about monogamy, polyamory, and beyond. You know, and we'll be guided by that question: what lies beyond monogamy and polyamory? In my own evolution from a socially enforced monogamic culture, you know, coming here into the Bay Area and encounter a more open culture and meet many people.
That's why you came here.
Polyamory.
You knew where to go. Yes.
I came for CIS, you know, to get my PhD there and stuff, but I encountered also this more open culture, you know, and but also I didn't fully resonate with a lot of the poly circles here in California. There was like this, you know, what I called before the mono pride. There was like this. I don't know, and for me, it was like always like, what's beyond those boxes? What's beyond those potential ideologies that we put ourselves in? What's beyond monogamy and polyamory? You know.
Who are some of the people you have admired or have been your teachers and sources of inspiration?
Too many to count. We need like a 2 hours interview.
Some
but one key person, well, it's a couple. His name is Ramon Albareda and Marina Romero that. We discussed, I mentioned you to her. So they created this body of work called Holistic Sexuality in Spain many years ago. And I was kind of like influenced by their work and some of the values of their work. I was instrumental in bringing the work to the States. And since then we offer workshops together in Esalen Institute, as well as at CIS and many other places. So that body of work, it's interesting. It gives like a direct reference to people about how, you know, structure, safe contact, intimate contact with many others could be a tool for integral growth, you know.
So she is somebody you hired, I think, or hired in one of the courses.
Marina Romero, yes.
I was asking,
yes.
I was thinking who in terms of spiritual leaders or leaders in the field of psychology or...
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, I mean, in terms of spiritual leaders, like, I mean, I have my, you know, some, you know, classical figures, you know, like poets, like Hafiz, you know, that I love, you know. Any spiritual figure that they were moving to the direction of like integrating the more sensual and the more subtle, I felt that I was feeling drawn. But unfortunately, as we all know, most spiritual leaders, even today, you know, they hold certain views around sexuality that are not extremely positive, you know. So still we are in a spiritual culture that values more the development of what I call a heart chakra spirituality. And a spirituality that is mostly focused on the cultivation of the, you know, subtle dimensions of the heart, equanimity, compassion, and also higher states of consciousness, you know. So I've been an advocate of what I call a fully embodied spirituality. It's a full chakra spirituality that is really about the integration of all centers, you know. And it's not even tantric, anyway.
No, I understand. A lot of difference between the culture here and the culture in Europe, in Spain, in Holland, where I'm from, in terms of dating and how men and women behave, and how they are being men and women. And,
absolutely.
Do you have a lot of contact with Spain, and do you actually contribute? Do you do things in Spain?
Yeah, yes. I go there every year and a half in a way to recharge my batteries, you know. There is something, I love the Bay Area, I love the States, there is so many things here, there is so much cutting edge thinking, there is Here, what I think is great about the Bay Area and states in general, is like the open-mindedness, to experiment, to push the envelope to the next thing, So countries like in Europe, I think they tend to be a bit more conservative in some areas, On the other hand, like there is like more rootedness, there's more groundedness, I think we need both. We need to be really rooted and groundedness, and then be also open to experiment, I find here in the Bay Area that many people are open to experiment and move the energy a lot, but in a not very grounded way, so they often don't integrate their experiences, They have all these tantric experiences, ecstatic experiences, medicine experiences, but later at the time of like transformations, real transformations in the everyday life, in the relationships, it's harder.
It's harder. Yeah. Well, you come from a very Catholic culture, which has a very different view on sexual relationships. So no wonder that you experience the Bay Area as very open.
Sure, exactly.
There's the whole Catholic background, and
totally.
I mean the whole conversation about polyamory. I mean, you should bring it back home. And
it's opening there. There is many polyamorous movements there, and I mean, I was lucky enough I was like in a Catholic school for 12 years, but it was like a more feminine orientation. The object of devotion with the Virgin Mary, was the Marian brothers. We never received a very repressive education, and also my parents were both very liberal in many ways. So I didn't come with a big repression there, I always like credit my mother, to give me some kind of like a baseline, from which I feel I can in a safe way to explore, and I think that's part of what we'll need, like more conscious parenting, so that when we become adults, we have a, what is called a secure attachment style, right? And I know that you have had a program around this here recently. And of course, from that secure attachment style is when you can have the more wholesome incarnations or versions of both monogamy and polyamory.
Yes. Hey Jorge, I think you are a breath of fresh air
Thank you.
As a fellow European, and I've seen the curriculum of the of what you're doing at the Institute, and very open-minded. The program about sexuality, what you bring in there about prostitution and empowerment and women's work. It's very, very impressive. Thank you for being here today and for being transparent and open and in conversation about these things.
Thanks to you, Max, and thanks for this wonderful program you're putting together. It's so important for our culture, so it's an honor to have been here and having been invited.
This was Private Matters. I'm Max van Praag, thriving in your life through intimacy. See you next time.
Si vos escrevem, no està escrevent. Si vos esquecem, no està esquecent. A teu dia qui vou voltar. Si vos escrevem, no està escrevent. Si vos esquecem, no està esquecem. A teu dia qui vou voltar.